Will Fantom be one of the altcoins that keeps pace with Bitcoin? Let's go ahead and discuss. So hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. I want to talk a little bit about Fantom and how we might think about it going forward, especially as it relates to Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is doing right now. So with Fantom, coming off of the lows here in mid-June, it's already up a very healthy 45.9% to the upside. So a very nice move that's been able to put in. But of course, we have to remember that this is happening in a context where Bitcoin has been going absolutely crazy, kind of coming out of a similar point. Bitcoin is currently up, from the bottom of this wick to where we are right now, about 24%. So not as far as Fantom, but it is moving to the upside. And this is happening in a situation where for a lot of Bitcoin altcoin pairs, so basically comparing an altcoin with Bitcoin, Bitcoin has been outperforming an awful lot of them throughout this time. If we actually flip over to the Bitcoin dominance chart, we can see that it broke out of this multi-year resistance at the top here and shooting off to the upside recently. And that's really all because the price of Bitcoin has been shooting up while a lot of altcoins have not. A lot of altcoins' price have been kind of stuck in the mire. They haven't been moving up, or if they've been moving up, it's been a lot less than Bitcoin has. So in some ways, this recent move up here for Fantom is an impressive move, although again, it had a much steeper correction through this time than Bitcoin did. So really, if we want to get a sense of how Fantom is performing relative to Bitcoin, we need to look at the Fantom Bitcoin valuation. So basically the way you can get this, just divide the price of Bitcoin from the price of Fantom. You get price of Fantom denominated in Bitcoin instead of USD. And we can see here is that throughout Fantom's life, really going up through early 2022, it was really in a big uptrend against Bitcoin. It was generally speaking outperforming. And of course, if we just look back at Fantom's price history against the US dollar, we see that it did very well, coming up, especially going into early 2022. So on its valuation, we see that it was in this massive uptrend. Then it went into a pretty nasty downtrend, kind of a bear market against Bitcoin going into the middle of 2022. Then since then, it's been more or less ranging sideways. And you'll note that right now, where it's trading on its Bitcoin pair, so Fantom Bitcoin, is actually basically at support. It's kind of at this level we'd really like to see Fantom hold if we think that its ability to outperform Bitcoin, coming up here is more likely. What you wouldn't want to see is a breakdown below, because that would mean that Fantom would be underperforming Bitcoin. And basically that would be meaning that you'd be better off holding Bitcoin than you would be holding Fantom through that time. And so in this current situation we are right now, where Bitcoin looks like it's knocking on the door of this resistance here up at around 31K and is looking like it's threatening to break up higher, what you'd really like to see is that if Bitcoin breaks up higher and gets up to closer to the upper 30Ks or 40K range, you'd want Fantom to keep pace. And what that would actually look like on this valuation is that at least holding this kind of sideways range, or really the bullish scenario for Fantom would be that it would actually end up moving up to a greater degree than Bitcoin, which would mean that this valuation would increase back up to some of these previous levels that we've seen before. And so really when I'm looking at this kind of analysis for Fantom, so kind of just not worrying too much about the USD chart, but just thinking about in this Bitcoin rally, is Fantom really even attractive right now? Or might it be something where you're just better off holding Bitcoin than Fantom? Really, you'd like to see it hold this range. And so I think if we see a Bitcoin breakout above this range, because as I was mentioning, watch this closely. At least I'm going to be watching this closely, because if this breaks down below the support, then I think that things will get a lot bloodier for Fantom, and it might get left in the dust for a while before any hope of starting to outperform Bitcoin again. Whereas if it's able to hold this as support and start moving up, then that would suggest that Fantom actually is the more attractive option in the current moment. So that we'll have to wait and see, but again, it can go in either way. It's either that Fantom is outperforming to the upside more than Bitcoin, or that Fantom is holding up better while Bitcoin is moving down. Either way, either one of those can lead this to go up. But in the current setting, I think kind of Bitcoin continuing to move up and then seeing how Fantom might react might be the more likely, just because Bitcoin does seem like it has a lot of momentum. Nothing's guaranteed, but it would not be surprising to me if Bitcoin breaks out of here sooner rather than later, and then we're just going to have to see a lot of altcoins behave in relation to that. So obviously not financial advice. You should make your own opinions. that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now with that. Now with Fantom, that's obviously a shorter term perspective. Ultimately what you might look at with Fantom is that even if it does break down below this support on its Bitcoin valuation back down to some lower levels, for example, back down here or back to around these kind of levels, what you're really probably looking for is, can Fantom survive to the next bull market, this kind of situation where it might be able to put in these massive multiples above what Bitcoin did, basically be able to outperform Bitcoin in those bullish periods. And Fantom being a significantly lower market cap asset than Bitcoin, you might expect it to be able to do a lot higher multiples in a bull market than Bitcoin can. And I think that's another thing that you can look at. And the interesting thing about Fantom is that really ever since the bull market, it has fallen down in its ranking in terms of its DeFi usage. So this is on DeFi Llama. We're looking at the different chains in terms of their total value locked on their protocols. We can see that Fantom currently comes in at number 15 at around 200 million, which is a far cry from what it had back in the height of the bull market. It had about 7.8 billion at its peak total value locked on the protocol, but of course it's fallen off quite a bit since. And that's a combination of people removing assets from the chain, but also just the value of those assets falling as well, because basically every crypto asset has fallen off massively since then, which is kind of combined to being a much lower value that's locked on it now. But I think still a respectable ranking, number 15. And it's kind of still hanging in there from that time. And so really, I think one of the things that I'm looking at with Fantom is that that does seem to be one of its biggest draws is its DeFi ecosystem. You can see just how many protocols it has on it. And certainly it got a lot of buzz and a lot of usage during the bull market around DeFi. So if it can kind of hold on and not become totally irrelevant on the DeFi space, that could become another narrative that runs in its favor whenever the next bull market might come around. Whenever DeFi might get hot again, a lot of people flooding into these alt L1s, especially if Ethereum remains to be incredibly expensive. DeFi on, there's still going to be some demand that remains for cheaper DeFi. Currently, we've been seeing that it's actually been kind of the alt L1, or excuse me, the layer 2s for Ethereum that have really been gaining in their total value locked. And that probably will be a theme that continues in the next bull market. But I still think despite that, there's probably still going to be demand for some DeFi on alternative layer 1s to Ethereum and not just layer 2s on Ethereum, where Fantom might still be able to grab some of that. So it's not to say that's going to be nearly as explosive against Bitcoin whenever that would come around, but I still think it'd be reasonable to expect it to do decently in that kind of environment. It's just a question of, is that right now? And that's where I think we're at a really critical level, where if Fantom can hold up against Bitcoin, then there might be some possibility of it doing something more impressive coming up here. But it would not surprise me if we kind of fall off of this level and then it becoming a more longer term thing to watch for Fantom and not expecting it to go too crazy in the short term. But certainly, for those who have been able to catch Fantom before these big rises, they have been rewarded handsomely, especially against the US dollar. There's a 2,000% move to the upside here, for example. This one was going up here, almost 7,000% move to the upside. So it's not to say that that is going to necessarily be able to happen again, but certainly coming back to these levels, it's possible that Fantom could at least put in some decent moves without even having to put in a new all-time high. If we just look at, if Fantom were to go off to the races from where we are right now, getting back to the all-time highs would be about 1,000% move to the upside from current prices. Even just getting down to, levels considerably lower than that are still decent multiple moves up as well. So the final thing I wanted to talk about with Fantom, and one way that we can kind of look and potentially anticipate some of these moves, for example, this move that it did here, which was quite impressive in and of its own right, going up about 230% at this, in this run, considerably more than a lot of other altcoins did, is we just look over at one of the models that we have at polaritydigital.io, our website. So if you want to get access to the models we have over at polaritydigital.io, you can subscribe to our Polarity Digital Pro subscription service. That's currently $15 a month. You can lock in at that rate. We think that that is an absolute bargain. It's going to be rising in not too long, but for now it's $15 a month. So link to polaritydigital.io in the description if you're interested. And what I'm showing you here is our trend confidence indicator for Fantom, TCI. And what this indicator does, as its name suggests, is it's looking at the trend of an asset. And really what it's looking at is how confident might we be in a given trend that this is going to be moving up. So as you get into these uptrends and the trend confidence indicator is increasing, that's a good sign. When you see it start to fall off, then that is a bad sign. That means that things might be getting weaker. But another way that you can look at this model is to look at trends, and specifically looking at descending trend lines. So for example, from these tops, if you see the TCI bouncing off a descending triangle, or excuse me, a descending trend line often, and what that often can happen is if you look and extend that trend line and look for when the TCI breaks out of it, in this case to the upside, that can be an indication of a change in the trend. Or basically the idea is that the trend confidence indicator was getting increasingly less confident, but now it's broken out of that trend. It's broken out of that down rating of confidence and thinking that this is not going to be an uptrend. And it's now said, wait, maybe I was wrong, really going to shoot off to the upside, become a lot more confident. And then sure enough, that basically called it right back down here. Fantom was trading at about 21 cents. And then Fantom ran all the way up to 64 cents after that. And then in fact, just recently it did the exact same thing again. You see this very consistent trend line we had where it was just constantly bouncing off of it, this whole downtrend that we were having, not being able to break above it. But then the second it did, now off to the races we've gone again. And that's been, this move that we're seeing over here that I was just talking about at the beginning. And then vice versa, you can also look at kind of the opposite. You'll see that oftentimes when the TCI is kind of in an uptrend here, when the lower levels are kind of bouncing off similar levels, when you break that to the downside, that's also concerning. It can lead to these big fall offs. They're kind of similar here. You have this uptrend forming in the uptrend on the bottoms of the TCI, but then that gets broken to the downside, and then price falls off. Similar kind of thing happens here. This kind of uptrend bouncing along that trend line for several times, gets broken to the downside, down we go. So that's one thing that I like to look at with the TCI, is that looking at these kind of behaviors can oftentimes give you some indication of whether or not to be concerned with an asset. And so, or concerned or to be interested, is it attractive or is it concerning? And so these breaks of kind of the confidence trend can be useful signals and things to keep an eye on. And especially when you're looking at them in confluence with other factors. So for example, other models that we have on ClarityDigital.io, like how risky is Fantom right now? What does its short-term risk look like? Are some of our other trend indicators looking bullish? Those things in confluence can give you an idea about these kind of things. And so, these were pretty clear signs at the time that Fantom was potentially going to be putting in a reversal. And so far, that's been playing out here again. So something else I just wanted to mention that can help us to kind of get that sense. And so to wrap us up with Fantom, I think Fantom's an interesting asset just because of how volatile it's been in the past, and certainly those who have managed to catch these moves have been very handsomely rewarded. And it is notable, I think, that Fantom is one of the, not all altcoins, are currently higher now on their Bitcoin valuation than they were back, here. A lot of altcoins are kind of oscillators that just kind of go sideways. And so I think right now is going to be a really critical level, as I mentioned before, to watch and see how Fantom can hold up against Bitcoin, if it might bleed more, get left in the dust, or if it can hold up or maybe even outperform. I think this level is going to be very important to watch. All right, so not financial advice. You should make your own opinions about Fantom, but that's just what I'm looking at right now. So if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And if you're interested in ClarityDigital.io and our Clarity Digital Pro subscription service, link in the description there. Go ahead and check it out.